Welcome to the Gentleman Project Podcast. I'm Cory Moore.
And I'm Kirk Chugg. We're honored today to have a good friend of mine that I've known for a number of years, Paul Rollins, on the podcast. Now, full disclosure, Paul is a fan of the podcast. He listens to the podcast every week. And we have discussed and talked about some of the content that we've had on the podcast together. And it kind of led to talking about a lot of the things that are going on in Paul's life, a lot of the experiences that he's had. It's stuff that we haven't talked about yet on the podcast. I invited Paul to be on the podcast because of the uniqueness of his story and the power of what he's been able to do through some of the experiences that he's had. And I don't want to ruin any of that for any of the listeners. So I'm going to let Paul tell his story, but his personal life has been one that has been very rewarding, very challenging, and is beautiful now. So I'm excited to welcome my friend Paul Rollins. He's joining us remotely from Idaho. He's moved all over the West since I've known him, but we've got him remote from Idaho this morning. So welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here. I'm like a fangirl, you know. This is like so exciting for me to be on. And I also want to say that it's really cool to me that you guys would have a average Joe like myself on. There's been so many great people on this podcast, and if you looked up average Joe in the dictionary, my name is next to it. And but it just shows me how you guys really value the purpose of the podcast, which is to be a good dad. There's so many good dads out there that they just show up every day in their homes, and they don't necessarily have some fancy job or make $1 bazillion. They just are good dads, and it's so cool that you guys value that. So appreciate it.
Well, I'm gonna correct you because Paul, I think you're anything but average. But I've looked up to Paul for a lot of reasons. But one of the first experiences that I had with Paul was I visited him in his home to make him some clothing, and I met his family. And one of the first experiences I had was meeting his son, Quincy. Yeah. And I would love for you guys to know about Quincy. He is one of those people that you see and he just makes you happy.
Yeah, he does.
So Paul, would you kind of introduce your family so people can understand what your background is and who your kids are and how proud you have got to be of these kids?
Yeah, I'll do it. It's kind of a story.
We like stories.
All right, I'll just jump in. So I have 2 children of my own. I am married to the beautiful Mary Eden. Just not even a year ago, we got married. We have 6 kids together. I have 2 of my own, and she has 4 of her own. But so before Mary, I was in a previous marriage, and I have my daughter Madison, who's now 17, almost 18. She's a senior in high school now. And wow. And then my son Quincy, who's 13, he's a special needs boy. He was adopted from Ghana, Africa. Quincy was born in a hut in the middle of the jungle somewhere in Ghana. I adopted him with my previous wife. And Quincy suffers from cerebral palsy and also from autism. But he is such a happy, sweet boy. He's 13, but he's sort of like a perpetual 5-year-old in a lot of ways. And with all of the stuff that goes with 5-year-olds, all of it, you're just in a 13-year-old body. So it can be a challenge, but more often than not with Quincy, it's just joy. It's, when you deal with special needs kids, what I've come to learn just having one in my home is they're angels. They're just angels, I don't know really how else to describe it. And it's hard for me to talk about Quincy without getting too emotional, because the light that he's brought into our home, I don't even know words can't describe it, and there's something that happens to you when you have to be a caregiver, day in and day out, and Quincy he's mostly nonverbal. Although, as you noticed today, Kirk, he's speaking a lot more than he has.
It's amazing to see the progress.
He's made a lot.
And to see how much he's grown physically
Oh my God.
since I've seen him last.
Yeah.
I believe that you told me before he was almost like a perpetual 2 or 3 year old.
Yes.
And he has advanced significantly since I've seen him last.
He does.
And he was saying hi to me. And
yeah, for sure. He does. It's just so delayed, but he does advance. And it's real easy with Quincy because he doesn't speak to just look at him and go, well, he's stuck in this mode. And so I'm always having to challenge myself to push him, right, to because he's like any other kid. He likes his comfort zone. And I don't want to limit him by the way I treat him or getting into, comfortable patterns. But it's a challenge. I have to help him get dressed each morning. I have to help shower him, brush his teeth. You have to give him breakfast, and my kids help too. I'm not the only one, and my wife as well. So it's one of these things that when you have someone like that in your home, it really teaches patience. It teaches long suffering. It teaches gentleness, because, and even though I still, to this day, sometimes I'll get upset with Quincy and then realize, like, what am I doing? Like, he does not process this like a normal kid does, but sometimes you fall into this trap. Well, I'll treat him like I treat any other kid, but you can't. He doesn't process it the same way. So you really learn gentleness and patience. I have often said, people have come up to me and said, well, you've saved this kid's life. Because Quincy, when we found him, he was so badly malnourished. He was abandoned. His birth parents abandoned him. He was in an orphanage. We knew of him when he was 5 months old, and then we got him when he was about 9 months old. And when we found him, he looked like a three-month-old. He couldn't move. His hair, teeth, nails, nothing had grown. He was just like this dead weight. And he was, a failure to thrive child, barely hanging on to life, And so people say to me all the time, well, you saved this boy's life. And I always correct them and say, no, he saved my life. And the reason I say that is because the softening, the edges that he's knocked off my life, the patience he's taught me, like the guy I am now, the man I am now, the father I am now, Quincy is largely responsible for that. And there's just, so cool. There's just something that a special needs child brings to your life that is really it's just hard to put into words, but he has really given me so much joy and so much growth as a person. But it's quite a story. Yeah, we went over there and found him. I actually didn't know anything about him. I just knew that, my previous wife and I, we had trouble having children of our own. Our daughter's ours biologically, but we had to go through a lot of hoops to get her. And so we wanted to adopt, and we heard about this little boy. And I knew nothing, so naive, and it even told my, family, I'm not doing a special needs child right out of the box. I was adamant. No, it's just too much, and it's already difficult enough to adopt. And, God's listening to all this going, okay, yeah, keep talking, Rollins. and so then, we heard about this boy and we started sending money over there. And when we finally got over there, when he was 9 months old, we heard about him when he was about 5 or 6 months. And we finally got over there when he was 9 months. And when we found him, I could not believe it. I actually argued with the lady, the social worker. I was like, that's not our child. Our child's 9 months. This child's like 2 months, 3 months. And I recognized right away there's a big problem. This child's not healthy. I remember thinking, oh man, what do I do? And then they put him in my arms. Yeah, that was it. Soon as he was in my arms, it was game over. Like I knew this boy was mine. I just felt this overwhelming, powerful spiritual feeling that just, God told me, this is your boy, and this is a gift. I felt that, in that very moment. And so from then on, it was just like, okay, let's go. And we still didn't know the extent of, you know, his issues. In the first few years of his life, he actually came to the United States on his first birthday. So he became a citizen on day one on his first birthday. So it's quite a birthday. And if you know Quincy, he loves anything America, flags,
Yes,
you know,
yes,
it's so interesting. But so, you know, it was a big deal for him, you know, even at 1 year old. But his first few years of life were, oh my gosh, you guys, it was, he never breastfed. So he never learned how to use the muscles in his mouth, which is probably part of the reason why he struggles with speech. And he never learned to chew or swallow. We had to have specialists come in to like teach him how to chew or swallow. And we would spend an hour getting a meal into him, and he would choke on the last bite, and he would just puke it all up, throw it all up. And then occasionally would aspirate some of the food. So, I mean, I think we had him in primary children's probably 3 different times with pneumonia because he would aspirate his food, and then it would cause an infection. He had several surgeries to put tubes in his ears. He's got one particular ear that just can't drain. And he's constantly getting earaches. He had to learn to walk. His cerebral palsy is different than most people you see where you see the real stiff joints, and Quincy's is kind of the opposite. His joints are super loose. He's like Gumby, you know, and his muscles are weak. And so, you know, we had to have a specialist come in. It took us 3 years to get him to walk. It was brutal. And I mean, now Quincy jumps, runs, plays. I mean, he goes way too fast for his capabilities. He's always falling down, but he'll fall down and get right back up. He cries for a little bit and then he's good. You know, he just loves to bounce around. It's almost like he's like, I know what it was like not to be able to do it. Now I do, and I'll never forget it. And, he had sleep apnea issues. We had to have his tonsils and adenoids removed. I mean, of course, all the learning delays that go with it. He was finally potty trained just last year. Okay. And we're still maybe 97% of the way there. That was such a relief to get that done, you know? So just imagine
12 years is a long time.
Yeah, just imagine changing, you know, poopy diapers on a 12-year-old. It's loads of fun. No pun intended. Anyways, it's just, you know, so much work. And, but at the same time, I wish you guys, all the listeners could know Quincy, because, you know, as soon as you see him, he's got 1,000 megabyte smile. And when he smiles, it's a spirit to spirit communication, and you just melt every time.
Yeah.
And he's a celebrity everywhere we go. He is a celebrity. I mean, you know, of course we're in, you know, Montana or Idaho, where, you know, there's very few black people. So number one, he stands out because of that. And then number two, he's just such a joy. He's so happy all the time. And he takes joy in the oddest things, flags and little toys. And he loves BYU sports, you know. I mean, he's just crazy about it. You know, loves to go to the games, knows the fight song, word for word, and all of this stuff. And so people just love him. And we go around town and people's like, you're Quincy's dad, you know. They don't know me as Paul. They know me as Quincy's dad. So that's kind of fun.
That's cool. In the last few years, you know, you mentioned that you lived in Montana and
Right.
Idaho. You kind of followed an inner voice of moving your family from Saratoga Springs, Utah to 9 Mile, Montana,
Yeah.
which, if you don't know 9 Mile, Montana, you're probably with all the rest of us. It's in the middle of nowhere,
Yes.
Montana. And as the leader of your family,
Yep.
making a big decision like moving your family to a place like that, and the conditions that you guys, you know, bought the property, and what was the driving force behind such a big decision? Walk us through that part of your story.
There were some things happening in my marriage, with my former wife, that I didn't know what was going on, you know, at the time. And we were in this beautiful place Saratoga Springs. We had such a beautiful neighborhood with so many wonderful friends. To this day, I miss them terribly. It was such a wonderful place to live. Of course, my family's all from Utah, so I had everybody there. And, my wife at the time was dealing with a pretty significant depression. It was very acute. Most people don't know the extent of it. And she was struggling spiritually. She was struggling mentally. I didn't realize at the time how serious it was, but I felt strongly that, and her and I had this dream to go to Montana for years. I'd been going fly fishing there for years, and I just love Western Montana. It is God's country. There's something about that place that just speaks to me. And so, and I have the kind of job where, I just need an internet connection in an airport and I can do my job. And so I informed my employer. They were like, I wish we could go, and so they're like, go do it. So we bought this beautiful 30-acre property about 30 miles west of Missoula in 9 Mile Canyon, right up next to the National Forest. So my backyard was, hundreds of miles of wilderness. It's just gorgeous, beautiful pine forest. I had a little creek and a pond on my property, that had trout in it. I could go trout fishing every day right outside my door. And we had this beautiful hilltop building site that could see the whole valley. And,
I'm ready to move right
now.
now.
Seriously, it was the hardest thing for me to give that up. It really was. But anyway, so when we moved, I felt really strongly that my family needed that. It needed to be out in nature. I thought that would be something that would help my former wife to deal with some of the challenges. I thought it would be good for us to be on our own, just kind of on our own, to bond and to rely on each other. And for the first year and a half, it really did improve things and help. But, my former wife, she deals with a pretty significant mental illness, which, she refuses to acknowledge and treat, which is unfortunate because it just, it led to where we are today. When you deal with mental illness, there's so much stigma around it. So much. And it's unfortunate, really, because part of the reason for her not getting the treatment she needed was the stigma. Like she, in her mind, I was calling her crazy, and which is not what I was doing. I desperately wanted her to get help. But because of the stigmas around mental illness, so many people just go untreated. It's one of the biggest drivers for homelessness in our country, is mental illness and the stigmas associated with it. And instead of, pushing people to get the help they need, it just isolates them. And that's exactly what's happened with my former wife. She's just completely isolated. She's isolated herself from her own family, from our family. She has no contact with her children at all. She's just essentially suffering from delusions where, God was telling her to do certain things. You just can't argue with that. You cannot reason with it. And there was so much uncertainty. There was so much fear and anxiety. Like my whole world was falling apart, and it was things that were happening. Like it was so bizarre and so scary. Like it was, for me, it was like, I was like, what is happening? What is going on? I could not get a handle on it, And I mean, there was a lot of extremist religious stuff going on, visions and channeling spirits and all this stuff that was so bizarre for us. Anyways, and my children, my daughter is seeing this, and she goes to this place. I remember my daughter, she would get off the school bus and she'd put her earbuds in, and she would come in the house and she'd go right up into her room upstairs and disappear. And I didn't appreciate what was happening at the time, but later she told me, the stuff that was happening in the car where mom would speak to people that weren't there and all the other scary stuff that was happening. And I didn't realize this till later, what was going on. But, here I am getting after my daughter, like, get those darn earbuds out of your ear and come down and be with us. And, I didn't realize the trauma she was suffering, and we were all dealing with it. And anyway, so this went on for a period of time until I finally just, I couldn't deal with it anymore. It got to a point where it was so damaging and so destructive to I've always prided myself on building a sanctuary. My home is a sanctuary. It's a safe place for all of us. It's a place where we can be spiritual, where we can make mistakes, where we can grow, where we can love each other and see each other, to be real with each other. And that place was gone. And I just, I saw what was happening to my children. There was neglect. There was, and it wasn't anything that she was doing because she wanted to. It was out of her control. And it was tough. It was a really tough experience for me and for my children. And so finally I filed for divorce, which for me, divorce is, it just never was in my vocabulary. And so for me to get to that point, and I endured probably 2 or 3 years of stuff that I probably shouldn't have endured. Now that I understand, boundaries and mental illness and all of it, I can see now that I probably endured more than I should have. But I did it because I wanted my family. I wanted to protect my family. It was what mattered to me. Anyways, I filed for divorce, and that's when everything really hit the fan. Because when you're dealing with someone with a severe mental illness, there's no reason. There's no logic. At the end of the day, there was somewhat of a protracted custody battle, but because she had been diagnosed with a mental illness, it was easy for me to put my children in a position where they could be protected. And, my ex-wife, she, in all fairness, she was an amazing mother. She saved Quincy's life. She bore the majority of what Quincy had to go through his first few years because I was working and she was a stay-at-home mom, and she did amazing work, but it happens, mental illness is a real thing. It happens. All of us, if we looked around our inner circle, we would see mental illness around us. It's very real. It doesn't get talked about. It often gets swept under the rug and ignored. And, in my case, I had to deal with it, in a brutal way. To this day, there's, she left on her own accord. She put forth an agreement where she would have no contact with the children. And, you just know that a mother like her would not have done that if it weren't for something wrong in the brain, some sickness, some illness. So it's so sad, it's so sad to watch what it does to people that you love and care for. So, I was a single dad in the middle of nowhere, Montana. I have a special needs son. I was like, what do I do? I was so lost. And, in my church community, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Being a divorced guy, whoa, that was it challenged all of who I thought I was, because so much of my identity was tied up in being a married man, a father of a family. Now I'm I'm one of those people. That's what I thought, wrongly. And now I realize that, there's a lot of good people that have gone through divorces, and divorce isn't the, the black mark that I thought it was. In many cases, it's a very good thing. And actually today I'm very thankful for divorce because it gave me an opportunity to find happiness again. You know what? I'm thankful for that. It was so hard. It was so difficult. Being a single dad of a 14-year-old girl, that will wake you up in the morning.
Good luck.
Yeah. I mean, it's so helpless, it's so helpless. I just felt like I don't know what to do. It was, now looking back, it was so good for me, for my growth, because it forced me to ask for help. I was the kind of person who's like, no, I'm independent. I'm strong. I chart my own course. I know what to do. I always know what to do. And then I'm like, I don't know what to do, and I need help. And it humbled me in a way that I needed to be humbled. It forced me to ask for help. I had to go to people in my community and say, I need a sitter. I need, and asking for a sitter when you have a special needs son, he's going to go to the bathroom and you have to clean him. That's so hard. It's so hard to ask people to help with that. I struggled with that so much. But the community that I was in, it was a small community in Western Montana. Those people were so good to me, salt of the earth. And now I know why I had to go to Montana. You know, I need it. Not that the people in Utah wouldn't have done the same, they would have, but that sort of small town vibe, that small town feel, people rallied. They rallied around me. They made me feel safe and protected, and they jumped in and helped. And, you know, and then, you know, I had to leave Montana. That was hard. You know, I wanted to keep my land up there, but, you know, I lived in the middle of nowhere. I lived so far away from resources. And then I'm single. To be a 45-year-old man dating again, that was, it was so weird. I don't even know how else to describe it. And so many people that are looking to a relationship to solve their problems. And that was one of the things I learned so much. You know, I've been going to regular therapy now for almost 4 years. And that was the thing I learned, you know, the most about from therapy, was to learn that I don't need another person to make myself happy. I have to do that. I have to be differentiated. That's a term that means I can stand on my own 2 feet. I can love myself. I can be confident in myself. I can know that God loves me no matter what I do. And I can be confident in that. And the more that I am that way, the better partner I am, right? Because now I'm acting from a place of choice, not a place of need or dependency. And that was massive for me. That was a massive revelation, because I had seen now with my previous wife how codependent we were on each other, you know, and there was so much codependency that I didn't even see. Now I see that. So I learned this in being single. I learned how to rely on others, how to humble myself and ask for help. That was a massive deal for me. You know, I've always been a spiritual guy. I've always, you know, looked to the Lord. But that experience, man, I doubled down. I remember when things got really scary with my ex-wife. I can remember the day I was sitting at my office desk. Oh, I was so weighed down. Oh man, that feeling. I just felt like I was in a black hole. I did not know what to do. And I just heard this voice in my head, which said, you know who to call, start calling. And I didn't even work that day. I just spent the day calling people. I called probably a dozen people. I called a trusted friend. I called my parents. I called siblings. I called a couple of old bishops from church wards that I was in that were dear friends of mine. I called people that I loved and respected that had been divorced. Those moments just gave me strength and lifted me and gave me direction. You know, it was tough. It was a tough experience. And then, so now I'm in this single dad mode, which, let me tell you, that is a weird place to be, because being a single dad with full custody, there's not many dudes out there that are in that position. Okay. Most of the time it's mom who gets custody of the children, and it's almost always a single mom. That was lonely. I've learned that it's actually taught me great empathy for the monumental challenge for single moms out there. And it's also taught me how important fathers are in the home, you know? And so when I met my wife, you know, she's a mom of 4 boys, 4, you know, and she went through a similar experience I did. You know, I want to be really careful here, but there was significant betrayal and some abuse, not physical, but emotional and mental manipulation. It was tough. That's all I'll say at the moment, but it was just super difficult what she went through. No woman should ever have to go through that. And so she's dealing with this, and she dealt with it for many years, many years. So when her and I started dating, one of the things that drew us together was the shared trauma, you know, like we had both been through this massive ordeal that was so ugly for both of us. And we bonded over this trauma. You know, we talked for hours about what it did to us and the struggles of being a single parent and dealing with these children. and you know, we just came to fall in love through this shared trauma. And, you know, both of us, once we were divorced and became free from this weight and you realize like, wow, what did I just go through? Because when you're in the moment, it's like a frog in a pot, like you boil a frog, you put it in the cold water and you just turn the heat up and the thing boils without knowing it. That's how you are. When you're in those tough situations, you're so focused on keeping your family together that you don't realize what you're going through. You don't realize the water is boiling. And then you get out and you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, what did I go through? And anyway, so we just bonded over this. And so now, her and I, when we were dating, one of the things we talked about so much was how excited we were for the opportunity to bring peace back to our lives and to our children's lives. And so fortunately for both of us, I have full custody of my children. She has her boys about 85% of the time. The two younger boys see their dad, about 6 days a week, or 6 days a month, I should say. And the older two don't have much contact. In fact, one son doesn't have any contact at all. So we have a kind of a unique opportunity because we get the most of the time with these children. And so when we got married, it was really important to us to build a sanctuary. I talked about that before, how I wanted my home to be a sanctuary. Well, we've got this gift, where we have two people who learned so much from this hard experience. And now we've got these 6 wounded kids, and they are wounded. Every single one of them are wounded. We've got a 21-year-old on a mission, and then we've got 5 teenagers in our home.
So far in the podcast, you've talked about mental illness from the perspective of the person suffering.
Yes.
And the stigma that surrounds that.
Yes.
And the damage that can be caused if you don't get help.
Yes.
You've talked about mental health from the perspective of a spouse.
Yes.
Somebody suffering from mental illness.
Yes.
And the importance of asking for help.
Right.
To deal with those challenges.
Yes.
You've talked about the openness that you've gone to therapy.
Yes.
I think most men think that that's a sign of weakness if we ask for help in any way. So the underlying theme that I'm getting from everything that you've talked about, and then also when you started to date Mary, you guys were a help to each other.
So much.
Is this underlying theme of it's okay to talk about things that make you vulnerable, and it's okay to talk about getting help. Yeah. It's okay to get help. Yep. It's okay to ask for help. There's no shame the only shame is not asking for something that would have been so easy to ask for, because the majority of us men are surrounded by people who would willingly and happily help us if we asked for it.
Yep. Yeah. I'm going to tell you,
for some reason, we just think that it's a sign of weakness. So,
we do.
And then I do want to go back, and talk about what you guys have done, these action steps of creating a blended household, and some of the things that you guys have found to be successful. Yep.
Yeah, you're right, Kirk. And it's especially stigmatized with men, right? We're supposed to be tough. We're supposed to be resilient. We're supposed to know everything. We're supposed to be the fixers. There's a lot of pressure put on men, and there's a lot of women that put pressure on men too, to be that. And so we feel it all the time. I think about mental illness. I am surrounded by it. Like when I started learning about it, I was like, whoa, this is everywhere. Everybody deals with it, not mental illness per se, but mental health. Right. And, my own father, who is an amazing man, like textbook good dad. Right. When I was 16, my brother died from cancer, 3 years old. Watched this little innocent boy wither away and die. And it wrecked my dad. You would have never known it though, because dad comes from, his dad was a rancher, a dairy farmer, get bucked off, get right back on kind of people. Dad dealt with it by going to work. Right. And then when the last kid was out, it's almost like the last kid left the house. Dad was like, okay, now I can grieve. And he had held on to this grief for years, and it sent him to the hospital. He walked over to my brothers with his guns and said, you got to have these. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. I mean, he wasn't particularly suicidal, but he was like, I'm worried, because he was so depressed. And all of us were like, what? Dad? My own mother dealt with that too. She just, first 2 years after my brother died, she disappeared, and my mom is a saint. As a youngster, I dealt with that. And then before that, I was sexually abused by a family friend, and I hid that for years. And so I just, all of this stuff that I dealt with in my childhood, this trauma of losing a brother, being sexually abused, I just stuffed that down inside me, just put it down there, cover it up, not think about it. Well, it doesn't help. It manifests itself in so many unhealthy behaviors. Like for me, the way it manifests, what I would perform, right? I would perform for attention, or I'd perform for admiration. So I was a good kid. I was a leader. So I would do everything really good. I had to be perfect. And I believe that if I was perfect and I performed, that these little secrets that I had, this pain that I had shoved down inside me would stay there, right? But what I realized later when I got into therapy, that was a defense tactic that I was using to cover up the pain. And so therapy taught me to go back to my childhood and deal with that wounded boy who had been abused and who had lost his brother, and I worked through that pain, and it was significant pain, and once I had dealt with that, oh my gosh, it was like a weight, and so many of us walk around life carrying that stuff. One of the things I love about your podcast, Kirk, is you've had people on, I forget the name of the fellow that you had on that was dealing with drugs and started, I think it was the Red Barn.
My cause.
Yeah. The thing that struck me about his story was his willingness to be real and honest. And so much so that he still refers to himself as a drug addict, right? But not in a derogatory way, but in an honest way. And that's what I had to learn about myself was I got to be real, man. I got to be honest and real. And it's okay that this stuff happened to me. I didn't choose it. It happened to me. But I've got to recognize that it's causing me pain and I need help to deal with it. And especially through my divorce, just getting real and going, I'm not such a tough guy. I need help and it's okay. And then watching my dad, and then, even with my ex-wife, I can see on her side of the family some struggles that they've had with mental illness. And even on my own side of the family, I've got 2 brothers that struggle with depression, so it's very normal. It's part of life. And if we're vulnerable enough to ask for help, we can extricate ourselves from really difficult, painful positions. It takes courage. It takes honesty. It takes authenticity. But it can be done. And so I just challenge the men that are listening to this, therapy, I'm telling you, if I could wave a magic wand, everybody would have a therapist. If my experience with it, I've got a really good one. Not all therapists are created equal. Sometimes you might have to go through 1 or 2 to find one that resonates with you, but good ones will challenge you. They will poke holes in your logic and your thought process. They will help you rethink and reframe. Man, I will never stop going to therapy. It's been great. And it's also led me to books and learning about mental illness and about mental health and about relationships. And all of this has helped me to where I'm at now to deal with these wounded children that we have, these wonderful, amazing children. And I guess I'll just segue into what we're doing here. When Mary and I got married, it was important for us to find connection with these children, and I remember I've got 4 boys that aren't my own. I'm their stepdad, but I'm not their dad. I'll never will be their dad. But because I am in their life 85% of the time, I get to be a dad figure, right? And so we've been very careful how we do it. For example, I never discipline those boys. Mary always disciplines them. But I'm standing right next to Mary when it's done. She's the voice. She uses the words. She lowers the hammer, so to speak. But I'm right there by her side. And I do the same with my kids. I try to be sort of like a fun uncle to them. A dad figure. I still have to, set boundaries and hold boundaries. But I really try not to do the dirty work of discipline, because what it does, I think, is it avoids the opportunity for resentment to build. They see me stand next to their mom, right? Which gives their mom a lot more weight, and vice versa. But they also don't have to deal with me, laying the hammer down and all the feelings that engenders. So that's helped build trust, that they see that I'm there with their mom, that I'm not going to leave her, that I'm not going to betray her, that I'm right there, and I'm right by her side. That really helps. We get together every night. We have we call it scripture study in our house, but it's actually, we do read from the scriptures, but we also take time to talk about their day. Each kid shares what happened. We do sometimes I call it a 2-for-1, give me 2 good things, 1 bad thing sort of thing. We ask, what happened in their day, and they love to share, and sharing those things makes them feel like they have a place. It makes them feel part of a family. It makes them feel safe. A lot of times we've done things like, each night somebody gives a prayer, and before the prayer we say, what do we love about this person? Those kind of things we do every night, and the kids love it. We'll spend sometimes up to an hour each night, just having this time. Sunday nights, we spend a little bit more time. We'll watch a movie. We'll have a lesson about something. We'll talk about life. We had the sex talk with all of them a couple of weeks ago, which they love so much.
How bad? Yeah.
You got
5 teenagers in a room at once. Wow. I've never heard of anybody doing it that way.
They were so comfortable. They loved it. But and Sundays are, in our home, I've noticed when I first came into the family, there was physical intimacy was an issue, like hugging. It was uncomfortable. So Sunday night became Sunday hug day. And you've watched as, it's uncomfortable at first to hug, but now we hug like crazy, And so we've just tried to do things like that to bond, and these kids get along so well. They love each other. There's plenty of differences. We try to do regular interviews with the kids where we just have one-on-one time with them and sit down and share. One thing we did that was cool, I got this idea I got from this podcast actually, was we came up with a family, I don't know if it's a motto or what you'd call it, but
yeah, Ryan Lee's.
I think it was
family motto, crest. Yeah,
it was. And our oldest son, Jake, who's on a mission, he's an incredible artist. So when he comes back, we're going to have him do it visually. But we sat down one Sunday night and we said, what are our values as a family? And Mary and I stood back and let these kids run it. And they came up with it. I'll read it to you. This is what they came up with. It says, we choose to make our home a fun-loving, safe, and peaceful place founded upon the principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ. In our family, we love, we trust, we learn, we contribute, we are patient, we are honest, we invite the Spirit, we press forward, we are guardians, we are whole. And at the end, they added boom, because Quincy says boom after everything he says. So that
I freaking love that. Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, and then we put it up on our wall, and every Sunday night we go through it and we say, okay, which one of these values are we doing good on? Which ones could we improve on? The other night we had to talk about honesty. I have a little candy stash in my closet, and a couple of these rats were going in there stealing candy. So mom had let's talk about being honest, and use that as an example. So those are the kind of things we're doing. I really try to, with these 4 boys, I've tried to, with my daughter, I had regular daddy-daughter dates. And so I've just done the same thing with these boys. That has helped really melt some of the walls. Just spending time with them. My youngest son, McKay, he's wanting to make the basketball team. So I got a key to the church, and a few mornings each week, we get up early and go to the church and work on his game. Oakley likes to fish. So we go hit the Snake River, and do that. We just try to spend time with them individually. Quincy is like a glue, when these boys have had to go clean their 13-year-old brother's bum. Now, if you don't think that's vulnerable, it's vulnerable. And so for them to be able to serve that child has really helped them. I'll just tell you a quick story, Kirk. I know we're kind of running long here, but I'll just tell you a quick story that just happened that it just gives me hope. When I was dating Mary, I was with my son, Oakley. It's her boy. Oakley's 16 now, but he was 14, I think, when we were dating. I was in the truck with him. And I said to Oakley, I said, Oak, I love your mom. And I'm going to be a good dad to you. And I'm not going to betray your mom, I promise. And he looked at me and he said, we'll see. And that floored me. I was like, oh, words don't mean anything. I'm going to have to really show this and model this. Well, 2 days ago, I'm going to get emotional because this is just, 2 days ago, he sent his mom a text and he said, hey, I need to talk to you and Paul about something. And it's a very common teenage boy problem that he's dealing with, but it's very personal and very vulnerable. And he sat down with us last night and he said, hey, I've got to be honest. These values that we're pushing, honesty, I've got to get this out in the open. Those were his words. And there was nothing easy about what he told us. Nothing. But for him to to see me and to have the trust that he could be vulnerable with me, when 2 years ago, he's like, well, we'll see. Oh man, that was like, I don't want to demean it using this example. It was like crack cocaine, I was like, yes, like that is a high, okay, it felt so good to
making some progress.
Yeah. To have that validation that, okay, these children feel safe in our home after all that they've went through, after all of the pain, and all of these kids have put up walls. And why wouldn't you? It's what the body does. It's what the mind does when you've been hurt, and they've all dealt with so much anxiety. When you're in uncertainty, like these kids have been for so long, and they felt the anxiety of their parents, because anxiety is contagious. It is so contagious. And their mom has been in this situation where she's been mistreated and betrayed for so long. Like she was always in fight or flight mode, and so was I. And when your amygdala is in this position where it's always in defensive mode, fight or flight, like you're always hyper vigilant. Well, now when you finally get into a peaceful place, you've been in this hyper vigilant mode for so long, you just don't flip a switch and turn that off. You have to relearn how to turn that off. And so that's what we're doing as a family right now is by creating this sanctuary and this safe place. We're allowing these kids to rewire their brain and train themselves that they don't need to be hypervigilant anymore. They can relax. They can be calm. They're safe. And that has been, man, I have just really wanted to focus on that, this last year or so. And we're making progress. We got a lot of ways to go, but we're making progress. So anyways.
That's fantastic advice.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Paul. Thanks for being so open with us. I think as parents, what just happened to you is what we crave. If our kids know that we love them and they'll be open with us about what's going on in their minds and their lives, then as parents, we're like, yes, thank you.
Yes.
If we can just have those two things,
yeah, right.
That's huge. So that's a huge win. Congratulations on that. That's fun.
Yeah, it was fun. And it just underscores too, the fact that he would sit down and say, I want to be open. I want to be honest. I want to get this in the light. Man, isn't that a metaphor for life, right? Like, and here's a 16-year-old boy teaching me that, that when we get our problems out in the light, we can actually deal with them, and not only that, but he's coming for help.
Right. Right. And what a beautiful thing for a kid to know that when they bring something like that to their parents, that their parents actually enjoy it.
Yes. Yep.
Right. That it is something that we crave, that connection, that vulnerability when our kids ask for our help. Yeah. If our kids just knew that that was okay and that we were going to welcome that instead of shaming them for whatever they're bringing to us, that is a game changer.
It is a big game changer.
And that will change the relationship with your children, faster than anything, I think.
Yep. Yeah.
When you have those vulnerable moments with each other.
I think we've had parents on the on the podcast that have said one of my biggest regrets was how I reacted.
Yes.
When a kid, and I can only imagine, Paul, that you reacted the right way, because I can tell by your demeanor and by the way that you talked about how the experience went, that your reaction was, we love you and we support you and we can get through whatever this issue is together. And I think I'm praying that I do that as those moments come to me, that I'm that parent that says, we got this. Yep. We love you.
Yeah.
And mostly we're proud that you were honest. Mostly we're proud that we're thrilled that you love us and we love you enough to have this conversation, because I think there have been many parents who've been on the podcast who said, well, one of my regrets was how I reacted to this news, and so I have a problem with that. Not so much in deep news like you're referring to, but just in everyday kind of stuff. I left this at school, or I got a bad grade here, and sometimes my reaction is, what?
Yes, exactly.
Versus,
I've been guilty of that.
Well, talk to me, tell me, I love you. It's going to be okay. And I hope that this podcast rings a bell in my ear to make sure that whatever the situation, that I can react in the way that, I should.
Right. Yep. You know what I think helps, Cory, is I recently, not too long ago, read a fantastic book. It's called What Happened to You? And it helped me to see that instead of with our kids, and I'm not perfect at this by any means, but instead of saying, what's wrong with you? When we can step back and go, what happened to you? That difference in question really helps us come from a place of compassion and empathy instead of judgment. And, when a kid is, what's interesting is the grade, and I've done the same thing, Cory, where I'm like, what? It's not an A? Like, what? We get A's in this house. What message am I saying? I'm saying you got to be perfect at all costs. That's not a good message to send. But when they come with a B, right? If you ask the question, okay, what's happening? Because clearly they got a B for a reason, So when we can have a conversation that says, okay, what's happening for you to get a B? And they say, well, and then it's too much time on my phone. I'm not prioritizing, whatever. Now you're having a discussion about real issues that every one of us struggles with. And they don't feel judged as much as they feel helped. And, I'm really trying to work on that as a parent, and especially with these wounded kids of ours, to just come from a place of what happened to you. Because when I do that, then I look at their past and I look at what they've had to wade through, and the compassion goes way up. The empathy goes way up. And I'm a much better help to them and a much better dad when I come from that point of view,
Well, we always finish the podcast with one question, Kirk.
And Paul probably knows that question very well.
He probably knows it really well. So, Paul, what does it mean to you to be a gentleman?
Well, I've thought about this. And actually, it's funny. Every time I hear the podcast and you guys end with that, there's a scripture that comes to mind. I won't recite it, but I'll just share some of the qualities that are mentioned. And, you guys might recognize this, but words come to mind. Like when you talk about power and influence that we have over the lives of our children. But to me, a gentleman is persuasive. He's long-suffering. He's gentle. I mean, that's in the word itself. He's meek. I think there's massive power in meekness. And that word is just not understood these days. People don't understand that word. Love unfeigned. Not fake love, real love, authentic love. kindness and knowledge, like all of those things. A gentleman is a master of all of those things. I am not. I'm working on it. But I think a gentleman embodies all of those things. You know, as parents, sometimes we fall in love with control. And when we try to control, nothing good happens when we try to control. As a parent, I have to have the trust and the faith that what I'm doing, if I'm doing the right things, the habits, good practices in my home, I have to trust that that's enough, that they will see my vulnerability, my efforts, my love, and I don't need to control. I can just do those things and then trust that they will follow, you know? And I think the more I do that, the happier I am and the happier they are. The more I try to control, the less happy I am and the less happy they are.
That's a beautiful answer, and one that I appreciate. I feel, as you say all those things, I think, yep, I've heard those words before, and they do describe to me what a gentleman is. And, every one of us has a different definition and a different context in which they hear that word and understand that word. So you can take, as a listener today, you can take Paul's definition, and if that resonates with you, if not, there's almost 50 other podcasts and 50 other answers, and they are all beautiful because it's the way that we understand how we become best versions of ourselves. Much gratitude to you for the example that you've been to me personally, as I have followed your journey and seen the love, the real love that you have for your family. You've always been a great example to me. And for that, I'm grateful. I know that the people that listen to the podcast with an open heart today will know the things that they need to do to be and ask for the help that those closest to them, closest around them need.
Right. Thanks, Kirk.
And it's a beautiful message because why are we here? Why are we put in places where we have the resources if those resources are never utilized? Be that resource and ask for that resource without shame. And I think that we can all become better versions of ourselves and truer gentlemen at the same time. So thank you so much, Paul, for sharing your vulnerable story with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for letting me do this.
Being a good man and a good friend.
You're too kind. Thanks, Kirk.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the podcast today. If you have not subscribed to the podcast, it's something that helps our podcast. So if you haven't subscribed or haven't left a review, please do so. That would greatly help us. Cory and I would very much appreciate that. It helps more people get the message out and hear the things that guests like Paul have to say. So thank you very much for listening, and we will talk to you next week. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. Be a gentleman.